Hello, fellow strawmen. Today I found a video from the channel Towards Eternity claiming that they have 3 questions for me that they don't think I can answer. I certainly can answer them. The question is, will they find my response convincing? Only one way to find out. And of course, for the sake of brevity in my own video, I will not be showing their full argument. So if you haven't seen already, please click the link and listen to their argument, then come back and listen to my response. See you in a minute.
Atheism, a view that constantly leads you to a dead end while questioning the universe. While everything we see in the universe is actually evidence for accepting the Creator, atheism ignores them.
I mean, what a great way to start, man. Even in my disagreement with you, I would never say that Islam leads you to a dead end. Even incorrect answers can hold lessons. And for you to claim otherwise of my worldview is to betray how close-minded you really are. But that won't scare me away. Let's see what you have to say anyway.
Question number 1. Where do these characteristics come from? It's an established rule that one cannot give what one doesn't have to another one.
Okay, but the idea that one cannot give what one doesn't have to another is not an established rule. On the contrary, it's ludicrous and demonstrably wrong. How do you explain where the blue comes from when chemists mix together 2 clear liquids and the product is blue? Where does the smoothness of a polished rock come from if it was polished with coarse sand and other sharp rocks in a tumbler? Or even where does the love come from when somebody who is unloved bestows their love on another? Things give what they don't have to each other all the time. Whoever established this rule didn't know what they were talking about.
Let's consider a black pencil. Can you draw a rainbow with this pencil? No, because the pencil is in no color other than black. So naturally, a rainbow cannot be drawn. What I mean is, you cannot give a feature you don't have to someone else.
Giving a few examples of things that don't give each other new properties that weren't there before doesn't mean that things can't give each other new properties. It only takes me one example to show that it's possible, and I've given you 3. Your entire foundation for the question you're about to ask is wrong.
Now, I take a look at the universe and I see that everything is made of atoms. However, although atoms are ignorant, willless, lifeless, and blind, deaf and numb creatures having no cognitive senses, when they come together and occur to us as a human being, we see that the man made of them carries all these features.
Systems having properties that their components don't is entirely different than one thing giving a property to another. So, way to make your first point irrelevant. Of course, this new idea that systems cannot have emergent properties is also demonstrably wrong. One link in a bike chain is not able to spin the wheels when the pedals are spun. 2, 3 dozens of links can't do this. Once I have a chain long enough to span the gap, it can briefly transfer power before falling off. If I keep adding links, eventually it becomes long enough to connect back on itself, thus getting the property that it can continuously transfer power. And again, even though I only need one, I could show multiple counterexamples. One muscle cell could not possibly pump enough blood for my body to survive, but a whole bunch of them in the correct structure, and I have a heart. Need I go on?
So, the basic question is, how can atoms give these properties to human beings while they lack all of them?
Finally, we get to your real question. How could the cognitive systems we see today actually work on natural means alone, made out of atoms and nothing more? Simple. Your belief that emergent properties don't exist is wrong. They do exist, and new ones emerge at each new level of complexity. Atoms combine to form molecules, which combine to form biochemical systems, which combine to form neurons, which combine to form brains capable of cognition. New properties are emerging at every level. Now, I do not claim to have solved the hard problem of consciousness, and cannot give you every detail of how the physics causes the chemistry, which causes the neural interactions, which causes consciousness. But I can say that there is no reason to think that such a chain of causality would violate the laws of physics. It certainly doesn't violate the rule about things not giving new, previously non-existent features to each other, because no such rule exists.
Because the atom that cannot see cannot create the seeing eye. The atom that cannot hear cannot make the hearing ear. The atom without life cannot form the human who has life. The human being has a variety of feelings while atoms don't have any. And all of these things are repeatedly happening every day, even every second. So isn't it necessary to accept that they are under the command of a creator who has attributes such as knowledge, will, power, life, sight, hearing, and compassion behind these atoms? As we said, one cannot give what one doesn't have to another one, so there must be a creator.
As I have given several examples of how emergent properties do exist, I will say that no, it is not necessary to think that my senses, emotions, and very sentience are under the command of a creator. That only raises more questions than it answers. Rather, I believe that my mind is an emergent property of my brain, and though imperfect, evolution has made it generally capable of accurately perceiving reality.
Second question, who is the judge, who is the prisoner? If everyone is a soldier, a commander is required. If everyone is a prisoner, a judge is needed. It's a rule that you cannot be the judge and the prisoner at the same time. What does this mean?
That is a wonderful question because right now that rule makes even less sense than the first one.
You know that a room cannot be dark and light at the same time, or a paper cannot be dry or wet at the same time. These are some examples confirming that one cannot hold two opposite attributes at the same time, because carrying two attributes opposite to each other is a contradiction. Being a judge and being a prisoner are two opposite states. If you are one of them, it's impossible to be the other.
I agree with you that things can't be in two mutually exclusive states or hold two contradictory properties, but I don't know that I would say that judges and prisoners are opposites. Sure, it'd be very difficult to be a judge and a prisoner at the same time, but it would also be equally difficult to be a judge and a congressman or a mailman and a prisoner. I'm also not sure it's truly impossible to be both of these things. What about a person who's a judge in one country but being held prisoner by another? So, in summary, your question still makes no sense to me.
Now, think of a building which is being built with bricks. If you do not accept the architect to build it, it will be a contradiction to accept that bricks are building this on their own. Because in this case, the bricks will be both prisoners and judges of each other at the same time. Since all the bricks have a nature that is the same with each other and have no knowledge and free will, they cannot form a building by coming together and agreeing. Otherwise, it will be a contradiction. Who will give the order? Who will apply the order? A great confusion would show up. They wouldn't be able to establish a system that could stay protected from collapsing at once. So, they are all prisoners, and there must be an architect who has an absolute power on them. The judge is the architect, and the bricks are his prisoners.
Agreed, brick walls were not made by the bricks. There must have been a builder. But the fact that brick walls imply a builder does not follow from the fact that the bricks are all the same as one another. Individual fire ants are all practically identical, yet they can form bridges and rafts by piling onto each other and linking together without a commander. Nor does it follow from their lack of knowledge and free will. Mountains aren't sentient, yet they are built by continents being driven together by heat escaping the Earth's core through convection, not by humans. We know that brick walls are all designed because their structure is clearly functional, incapable of self-reproduction, and made of components that do not naturally occur.
Likewise, when we examine the human body, we infer that atoms cannot make this system.
So you're telling me that when we look at the human body, which is demonstrably made out of atoms, we can infer that atoms, which make up literally all physical things, can't make the human body. Do you really think that statement makes sense? Because I don't.
350,000 people are born every day. Who is the commander here and who is the applier? If we assume the atoms to be doing this job, which ones among them give orders and which ones follow the orders?
You finally asked a question that made sense. I really wish you just started with this and not that whole weird metaphor with the prisoner and the judge being used to explain another metaphor with the bricks and the architects. What I understand you to now be asking is, if all atoms are equal to each other and not sentient, then how do some of them provide information on how to build a human baby, while others act on this information to actually build a baby? To then answer the question, I must first explain that it is actually necessary that the atoms themselves are not sentient. If they were each doing their own thing, then how would our bodies convince each one to hold its place in the proper molecule to build even a single cell? It would be like trying to herd cats to build, say, a brick wall. Natural selection acts on an organism as a whole based on how well it physically fits its niche, yet the information to build the organism is contained at the genetic level. If atoms did not act consistently based on intrinsic properties, then passing down the surviving genetic codes would pass on none of the beneficial characteristics of the previous generation, selection would be unable to act, and evolution would be falsified. It is a very good thing that atoms have no free will and instead always act the same way in the same situation. To then actually address your question, atoms are not all equal. There is an entire periodic table full of elements, each type of atom with its own unique properties. 94 of them exist in nature, and 21 of them are found in the human body. It is the variation made by the many possible ways of combining these elements that makes different molecules in your body act differently. Although I disagree with the applicability of the analogy to try to meet you where you are at, the judge would be DNA. It stores genetic information in the sequence of specific nucleotides, which, although they all have the same backbone, have mildly different chemistries which affect which other molecules combine to them. Through the process of transcription and translation, this causes particular amino acids to correspond with particular sequences of DNA. The chains of amino acid then consistently fold into proteins that may perform some particular function, thus making them and everything in your body that isn't DNA the prisoners. Although I want to stress that they are still very different from each other and perform a myriad of functions at the cellular scale. These functions then combine to build self-replicating cells, which combine to make a baby human. DNA that doesn't build an organism capable of self-replicating gets weeded out by natural selection very quickly.
Question number 3. What is the real reason? Imagine that we see a train and a baby is pulling this huge train with a rope in his hand. Nobody would believe this, so they would look for a hidden cause behind it, right? Because there are no attributes such as sufficient power, knowledge, and will in a baby. No doubt, another resource is required.
I agree, but the only reason you gave that was actually accurate was the one about the baby having insufficient power. You can calculate how much friction there is in the system and what force would be necessary to overcome it. Knowledge and will have nothing to do with it.
In fact, we see gaps between causes and effects in the universe every day. While the causes are so simple, the results are extremely complex. The emergence of huge trees from a tiny seed, the emergence of a magnificent peacock from a simple egg, the emergence of a complex human from some simple water show us some examples of the gap between causes and results. So it's necessary to look for another source behind the view.
This is nothing more than an argument from ignorance. Just because you don't understand the connections between these things does not make them impossible. Reality does not owe you an explanation. And I'll grant you that while saying trees come from seeds and peacocks come from eggs is accurate, it is extremely inaccurate to say that humans come from simple water. That's such a straw man. Do you really think that that's what I believe humans come from? I really hope that isn't what you believe either, because the truth of how we come to be is so much more beautiful and complex than water.
Because atoms lack the required attributes such as knowledge, free will, power, and life. So, who holds these attributes?
All three of your questions are solved by a point I made responding to the very first question you asked. Emergent properties do indeed exist. Here's another example in case you don't believe me. One grain of sand behaves as a solid, but many millions of them behave like a liquid. Since emergent properties exist, then attributes of living beings do not necessarily need to be reflected in the fundamental components that make them up. And as an aside, the fact that you're calling power an attribute makes me think that you aren't using that word the way physicists use that word. So stop using that word.
How can these atoms form a structure like a peacock despite lacking attributes such as knowledge, free will, power, and life? An explanation which is based on temporal sequence of events leaves out these questions with no answers. So, as we said in the beginning, that a baby cannot pull a train. Just like that, another cause appears to our minds behind the scenes due to the gaps between the so-called causes and their effects that we examine in the universe.
The reason why we agree that there is a gap between cause and effect in the baby train example is because I could, in theory, calculate the rolling resistance of the train given its mass and the material properties of the rail and the wheel, calculate the pulling capacity of the baby, and conclude that it's not enough to overcome the resistance. In other words, I can use known properties of reality to demonstrate why an explanation is impossible. Or maybe I could hypothesize that the baby was pulling a balloon that just looked like a train, so not impossible after all. Actually, have you ever seen those inflatable tanks that they used as decoys in World War II? The pictures are amazing and entirely Photoshop free. Point is, though, ruling out one proposed explanation can help you form the next hypothesis, but you have to keep it within natural explanations. Now, I will commend you for trying to find some known property of reality, some standard by which you could rule out false ideas. And you came up with the idea that properties cannot be given if they're not already present, nor emerge from groups coming together. However, I have given you several examples that demonstrate that this is not a good standard, because by its logic, sand couldn't act as a liquid, nor could chain links form chains. Your entire argument that knowledgeable, powerful, living beings with free will cannot exist without an all-powerful life giver is based on this faulty standard, and so it falls apart. Now, before I end, on the off chance that the people from Towards Eternity see this video, then I have a few questions for you. Firstly, do you deny the counterexamples that I have provided of the things which have emergent properties? And if so, why? Second, are there any other standards that you think we actually could agree on that would be incompatible with natural explanations of consciousness? Can't wait to hear from you, and as always, go read a fucking book.